Behind the dazzling spotlights of Hollywood's golden age lurked shadows darker than any film noir. Before his death, Burt Lancaster, the principled titan of cinema, compiled a shocking list naming those he considered truly evil. Not just difficult personalities, but monsters hiding behind silver screen smiles. Was Lancaster settling old scores or exposing Hollywood's greatest deception? Kirk Douglas. Kirk Douglas wasn't just another Hollywood pretty face. He was America's moral compass on screen, the hero who fought for justice in films like Spartacus. But according to Lancaster, a very different man existed when cameras stopped rolling. Their famous collaborations in Gunfight at the OK Corral and 7 Days in May masked what Lancaster called a ruthless ambition that left bodies in its wake. Lancaster claimed Douglas was coldly calculating, willing to destroy anyone blocking his path to stardom. He wasn't competitive, Lancaster reportedly wrote. He was predatory. Douglas allegedly blacklisted rivals, manipulated studio executives, and even betrayed close friends for better roles. Most disturbing were whispers surrounding a teenage Natalie Wood. Lancaster reportedly claimed Douglas invited the 15-year-old actress to his hotel room for a private audition that turned horrifying. Though Douglas maintained his innocence until his death at 103, this shadow followed him for decades. What made Douglas particularly dangerous, according to Lancaster, was his masterful public image management. While projecting wholesome American values and supporting liberal causes publicly, behind closed doors, he allegedly ruled through fear and intimidation. Douglas's first wife supposedly called living with him like being married to a hurricane of rage. Industry insiders were divided. Some defended Douglas as merely ambitious in a cutthroat business, while others whispered confirmation of Lancaster's claims, too afraid to speak publicly against such a powerful figure. Mickey Rooney. Mickey Rooney charmed America as Andy Hardy, the wholesome teenager whose innocence captured hearts nationwide. Behind that boyish grin, Lancaster painted a portrait of a bitter, vicious bully whose tantrums terrorized film sets for decades. Rooney wore the mask of mischief, Lancaster allegedly wrote, but beneath it was something far uglier. Lancaster described witnessing Rooney's cruel treatment of extras, makeup artists, and especially young actors who threatened his spotlight. The former child star reportedly enjoyed humiliating colleagues publicly, derailing scenes if someone else was getting too much attention. His relationship with Elizabeth Taylor during National Velvet raised serious concerns. Taylor, just a teenager, reportedly avoided being alone with Rooney after uncomfortable encounters. When questioned years later, Rooney dismissed Taylor as entitled and barely talented, reactions Lancaster saw as vindictive damage control. What made Rooney's behavior particularly disturbing was how his diminutive stature and cheerful public persona created perfect cover. Directors excused his outbursts as artistic temperament, while studios buried complaints from those with less power. His 8 marriages often ended due to what Lancaster called emotional warfare, with second wife Ava Gardner describing their brief union as living in hell. The contrast between Rooney's public and private personas highlighted Hollywood's most insidious deception. Stars whose charming on-screen personas masked their true nature, enabling decades of abuse protected by studio power. Fay Dunaway. Fay Dunaway wasn't just talented, she was electrifying in classics like Bonnie and Clyde and Chinatown. But Lancaster claimed her brilliance came with a terrifying cost for anyone working alongside her. She didn't just play monsters, Lancaster allegedly said, she became one when cameras stopped. Lancaster described her as a psychological terrorist who identified people's insecurities with surgical precision, then exploited them mercilessly. Makeup artists, costume designers, and assistants became her favorite targets, people who couldn't fight back without risking their careers. The infamous Mommy Dearest production became her darkest chapter. Lancaster claimed multiple crew members abandoned the film rather than continue enduring Dunaway's abuse. She reportedly threw objects at fellow actors, deliberately sabotaged scenes, and reduced assistants to tears through hours of screaming over minor details like how hairpins were presented. What distinguished Dunaway's behavior from typical Hollywood ego, according to Lancaster, was her apparent enjoyment in watching confident people crumble under her attacks. One former assistant called working for her psychological warfare, where every task became an impossible test. Even James Woods, himself known for difficult behavior, expressed shock at her throwing a cup at him for ad-libbing a line. Her methodical targeting of industry workers who depended on recommendations for future jobs was particularly cruel. Many talented professionals left Hollywood entirely after experiences with Dunaway, their careers effectively ended by one powerful actress's unchecked rage. Orson Welles. Orson Welles created Citizen Kane, possibly the greatest film ever made. His genius was undeniable, but Lancaster claimed that brilliance concealed a master manipulator who weaponized his intelligence against everyone around him. Welles didn't just understand human psychology, Lancaster reportedly wrote, he exploited it like a predator. Recordings later discovered confirmed Welles privately dismissed colleagues like Laurence Olivier as dim-witted, Spencer Tracy as vindictive, and Charlie Chaplin as haughty, revealing his contemptuous view of fellow legends. Lancaster described Welles as creating elaborate psychological games on set, intentionally pushing actors to emotional breaking points while claiming it served the art. His first wife allegedly described their marriage as living with a brilliant devil who isolated her from friends and family, then systematically destroyed her self-worth through constant criticism disguised as intellectual discourse. What made Welles particularly dangerous, according to Lancaster, was his ability to convince others that cruelty was necessary for creating great art. He established the template that justified abusive directors for generations, Lancaster allegedly wrote. He made people believe greatness required suffering. The tragedy of Welles was how his legitimate genius became entangled with his psychological manipulation. Even as studios increasingly refused to work with him due to his difficult reputation, his influential champions defended his methods as necessary for his artistic vision, perpetuating the myth that abuse was the price of cinematic brilliance. Errol Flynn. Errol Flynn dazzled audiences with his daring heroics in films like The Adventures of Robin Hood, becoming the ultimate romantic idol. Lancaster reportedly called him a predator hiding behind a hero's smile, whose charming roguish image concealed systematic predatory behavior. Flynn allegedly perfected a method of luring young actresses to his yacht or mansion under the pretense of discussing career opportunities. These women, many barely out of their teens and desperate for their big break, instead found themselves trapped with a calculating predator who knew the studio system would protect him. Lancaster claimed Flynn's accusers faced an impossible challenge when seeking justice. Studio fixers deployed teams of lawyers and private investigators to smear victims, portraying them as gold diggers targeting an innocent star. The 1942 statutory rape trial became the most public example. Two teenage girls came forward, only to have their reputations destroyed while Flynn was celebrated after his acquittal. Most disturbing was how studios reportedly weaponized Flynn's predatory reputation in marketing his films. Lancaster claimed executives deliberately promoted his image as an irresistible ladies' man, essentially using his status as a sexual predator as a selling point for movies, while publicly denying any misconduct. Flynn's case illustrated how completely the studio system was designed to protect valuable stars regardless of their behavior. The same system that created heroes on screen, Lancaster allegedly wrote, created untouchable monsters in real life. Peter Sellers. Peter Sellers brought laughter to millions through The Pink Panther and Dr. Strangelove, but Lancaster painted him as a psychological abuser whose greatest performance was convincing the world he was merely eccentric rather than cruel. Sellers created more misery off-screen than joy on-screen, Lancaster allegedly wrote. His first wife reportedly lived in constant fear during their marriage. Sellers would disappear for weeks without explanation, then return with explosive jealousy, demanding detailed accounts of every phone call and visitor during his absence. His treatment of his children revealed particular cruelty. Lancaster claimed Sellers would deliberately build up his children's excitement with promises of elaborate vacations or expensive gifts, then abruptly cancel everything at the last moment with no explanation, a pattern of emotional manipulation that caused lasting psychological damage. What made Sellers especially dangerous was his weaponization of mental health struggles to avoid accountability. When confronted about cruel behavior, he would claim his depression and anxiety made him unable to control himself, manipulating victims into feeling sorry for him rather than angry. He used his genuine suffering, Lancaster reportedly wrote, as a license for inflicting suffering on others. Despite his brilliant comedic talents, those closest to Sellers experienced a nightmare behind closed doors. His son later wrote about the long-term psychological effects of growing up with a father who turned emotional abuse into an art form, creating wounds that never fully healed even decades after Sellers' death. Bing Crosby. Bing Crosby's smooth voice brought comfort and joy to millions, especially with White Christmas becoming the best-selling single of all time. Lancaster allegedly called him a man of ice with a voice of velvet, whose public warmth masked private cruelty, particularly toward his children. Crosby sang lullabies to the world, Lancaster reportedly wrote, while ruling his own home through fear. His son Gary later confirmed Lancaster's claims in a shocking memoir, describing systematic physical and emotional abuse that occurred behind the perfect family image Crosby cultivated in public. Lancaster claimed Crosby maintained rigid control over his family, imposing military-like discipline and administering harsh punishments for minor infractions. His children were reportedly weighed weekly, with even slight weight gain resulting in humiliation and restriction. Gary described being beaten with a leather strap studded with metal if he broke his father's strict rules. What made Crosby's behavior particularly insidious was how completely it contradicted his public persona as America's gentle, wise father figure. Studios helped maintain this deception, burying reports of family problems and promoting Crosby as the ideal family man. The greatest acting Crosby ever did, Lancaster allegedly noted, was convincing America he was the father everyone wished they had. The damage extended to the next generation, as Gary Crosby struggled with addiction and emotional problems throughout his life, a tragic legacy of abuse hidden behind Hollywood's carefully constructed facade of the perfect American family. Henry Fonda. Henry Fonda portrayed American integrity in classics like The Grapes of Wrath and 12 Angry Men. Lancaster allegedly called him emotionally arctic, a man who played warmth on screen while maintaining absolute emotional detachment in real life. He treated life like a courtroom, Lancaster reportedly wrote, where everyone was guilty until proven innocent. Fonda maintained such rigid emotional control that even his closest colleagues found him unreachable. On set, he reportedly spoke only when necessary, offering no warmth or connection to fellow actors. The greatest victims of this emotional deep freeze were his own children. Jane Fonda later confirmed Lancaster's assessment, describing a childhood of seeking approval from a father incapable of expressing love. "He never told me he loved me or that he was proud of me," she revealed, validating Lancaster's claim that Fonda's parenting caused deep emotional wounds. Lancaster allegedly detailed Fonda's infidelity in all but one of his 5 marriages, including affairs with Hollywood luminaries like Joan Crawford, Marlene Dietrich, and Barbara Stanwyck. Even his long-term relationship with Lucille Ball didn't prevent him from pursuing other women, a striking contrast to his on-screen image of moral rectitude. What made Fonda's emotional cruelty unique was its quiet, respectable nature. His coldness wasn't dramatic, Lancaster reportedly noted. It was a silent withdrawal of humanity that left those around him emotionally starving. This emotional abandonment, particularly of his children, created wounds that lasted well into their adult lives. Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford dominated Hollywood for decades with her fierce determination and legendary performances. Lancaster allegedly called her the Iron Matriarch, who maintained control through fear and intimidation, both on set and at home. She didn't just want to be respected, Lancaster reportedly wrote. She demanded total submission. Crawford allegedly terrorized younger actresses, seeing any rising talent as a threat to be neutralized. She reportedly manipulated studio politics masterfully, ensuring rivals received inferior roles, lighting, and camera angles. Lancaster claimed her perfectionism masked a deeper need for absolute control. Assistants lived in fear of her explosive anger over minor details, drinking glasses placed incorrectly, hangers facing the wrong direction, or slight deviations from her precise instructions could trigger hours of verbal abuse. What later shocked the world was Crawford's daughter Christina's memoir, Mommy Dearest, which confirmed Lancaster's private assessment of Crawford's character. The book detailed physical and emotional abuse behind closed doors, including the infamous wire hanger incident. While some defended Crawford, Lancaster allegedly insisted Christina's account matched exactly what industry insiders had long known about Crawford's true nature. Crawford's case demonstrated how Hollywood enabled its stars' worst behavior. The studio system didn't just ignore abuse, Lancaster reportedly wrote. It actively helped hide it, protecting valuable assets regardless of their actions. Crawford's carefully crafted public image of sophistication and strength concealed what Lancaster described as a woman who could only feel powerful by making others feel powerless. Lucille Ball. Lucille Ball made America laugh with I Love Lucy, becoming television's first female comedy icon. Lancaster allegedly called her the Queen of Control, whose brilliant on-screen humor masked ruthless business tactics and volcanic temper behind the scenes. Lucy didn't just want to be funny, Lancaster reportedly wrote. She wanted to own everything and everyone around her. As head of Desilu Productions, Ball reportedly ruled with absolute authority, micromanaging every aspect of production and creating an atmosphere of constant tension. Lancaster claimed her famous red-headed persona was carefully calculated. Every seemingly spontaneous physical comedy bit was rehearsed countless times, with Ball demanding perfection from herself and everyone else. Those who failed to meet her standards reportedly faced public humiliation and sometimes termination. What made Ball particularly formidable was her combination of creative genius and business acumen. She understood power better than any studio executive, Lancaster allegedly noted. She reportedly negotiated secret deals, manipulated contracts, and outmaneuvered male executives who underestimated her intelligence. While her professional achievements were groundbreaking for women in entertainment, Lancaster claimed her methods created significant collateral damage. Writers, actors, and crew members who crossed her allegedly found themselves blacklisted not just from her productions, but throughout the industry. Her laugh could fill a room with joy, Lancaster reportedly wrote, but her anger could empty a room in seconds. Spencer Tracy. Spencer Tracy won consecutive Oscars and was revered for his naturalistic acting style that revolutionized film performance. Lancaster allegedly called him a brilliant actor and a brutal drunk, whose alcoholism fueled abusive behavior that studios systematically covered up. Tracy could break your heart on screen, Lancaster reportedly wrote, and break furniture off screen. Tracy's alcoholism reportedly led to violent outbursts on set, with crew members learning to disappear when they saw warning signs of his rage. Lancaster claimed he witnessed Tracy reduce young actors to tears through vicious criticism, then forget the entire incident once sober. His relationship with Katharine Hepburn, while celebrated as one of Hollywood's great love stories, was reportedly far more complex. Lancaster claimed Tracy's Catholic guilt over their affair. He remained married to his wife until death, fueled drinking binges that Hepburn would patiently manage, acting as both partner and caretaker. What made Tracy's behavior particularly problematic was how his legitimate genius shielded him from consequences. Studios excused everything, Lancaster allegedly wrote, because his performances made millions. Executives reportedly assigned handlers to manage Tracy's drinking, clean up his messes, and ensure stories never reached the press. Lancaster acknowledged Tracy's undeniable talent, but refused to let it excuse his behavior. Being tortured doesn't give you the right to torture others, he reportedly wrote, challenging Hollywood's long tradition of forgiving abusive behavior when it came from troubled geniuses. Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe remains the ultimate Hollywood icon, her tragic life adding to her mystique. Lancaster allegedly called her the angel of addiction, whose vulnerability was both genuine and strategically deployed to manipulate those around her. Monroe didn't just suffer from her demons, Lancaster reportedly wrote, she unleashed them on every production. Her chronic lateness and unpredictability reportedly caused massive production delays, driving directors to desperation. On Some Like It Hot, she allegedly required 47 takes for a simple scene saying, "Where's the bourbon?" costing thousands in 1959 dollars. Lancaster claimed Monroe's childlike persona masked a shrewd understanding of power dynamics. When studios threatened consequences for her behavior, she would collapse into fragility so complete that executives felt monstrous for pressuring her. She made herself small, Lancaster reportedly wrote, so others would be forced to carry her. What complicated Monroe's story was that her trauma was real, her difficult childhood and mental health struggles weren't fabricated. Lancaster's controversial assessment was that she learned to use these genuine wounds as tools to control situations and people. This manipulation allegedly extended to her relationships with powerful men, including presidents and studio heads. The true tragedy, according to Lancaster, was that Monroe's behavior prevented her from achieving the serious acting career she desperately wanted. Her self-sabotage was more destructive than any studio system, he reportedly concluded, a harsh assessment of a woman whose vulnerability continues to generate sympathy decades after her death. Wallace Beery. Wallace Beery won an Oscar for The Champ and charmed audiences as a gruff but lovable everyman. Lancaster allegedly called him the unattractive truth behind an American lie, a man whose on-screen persona completely contradicted his real personality. Beery didn't act like a tough guy with a heart of gold, Lancaster reportedly wrote. He was genuinely cruel, especially to those with no power. Beery allegedly targeted child actors with particular viciousness, with Mickey Rooney later confirming Beery's physical roughness and verbal abuse during their collaborations. Lancaster claimed Beery was notorious for undermining co-stars, deliberately stepping on lines or ruining takes if someone else was receiving too much attention. Gloria Swanson reportedly described working with him as enduring a daily assault, not just professionally but personally, as his hygiene was allegedly as offensive as his behavior. What made Beery's behavior particularly disturbing was how it contradicted the wholesome family films that made him famous. In movies like Treasure Island, he portrayed gruff mentors to young boys, while allegedly tormenting child actors when cameras stopped rolling. The studio created his image from thin air, Lancaster reportedly wrote, selling a father figure who was actually a bully. The disconnect between Beery's carefully crafted public image and his private behavior exemplified how completely studios controlled public perception. Through strategic publicity and manufactured stories, MGM transformed a reportedly unpleasant, aggressive man into a beloved screen icon, proving the power of Hollywood's image-making machinery. Louis B. Mayer. Louis B. Mayer wasn't just MGM's co-founder. He was the ultimate Hollywood power broker who created the studio system itself. Lancaster allegedly called him the smiling dictator, whose grandfatherly public image masked ruthless control over hundreds of lives. Mayer didn't just run a studio, Lancaster reportedly wrote. He created a fantasy kingdom where he was absolute monarch. Mayer allegedly monitored stars' private lives, arranging marriages, forcing abortions, and even dictating diets and exercise routines to maintain the MGM look. Nothing happened without his knowledge or approval. Lancaster claimed Mayer's treatment of Judy Garland was particularly destructive. He allegedly put the teenage star on amphetamines to control her weight and barbiturates to help her sleep, beginning the cycle of addiction that plagued her life. When she gained weight, he reportedly called her "my little hunchback" to shame her into starvation diets. What made Mayer dangerous was his complete control of both public image and private reality. He could destroy careers with a phone call, Lancaster reportedly noted. Stars who defied him found themselves blacklisted, while compliant ones received the best roles, directors, and publicity. This power imbalance created an environment where abuse flourished behind studio gates. While publicly positioning himself as a champion of family values, Mayer reportedly maintained a casting couch system and protected predatory executives and stars whose behavior would have destroyed MGM's carefully constructed image of wholesomeness. His greatest production, Lancaster allegedly wrote, was the myth of Hollywood itself. Jane Fonda. Jane Fonda transformed from Hollywood sex symbol to political activist, winning Oscars while fighting for progressive causes. Lancaster allegedly called her the revolutionary with a calculated heart, who used political passion to control narratives and silence opposition. Jane didn't just believe in causes, Lancaster reportedly wrote. She weaponized them against anyone who disagreed. While acknowledging her genuine commitment to social justice, Lancaster claimed Fonda's approach was often manipulative, using moral high ground to shut down nuanced discussion and cast opponents as evil rather than merely disagreeing. Lancaster allegedly described witnessing Fonda's ability to switch between warm empathy and ice-cold calculation, depending on whether someone supported her views. This emotional manipulation reportedly extended to professional relationships, where those who questioned her political stances found themselves labeled enemies not just of Fonda, but of progress itself. What made Fonda's behavior particularly effective, according to Lancaster, was how she combined Hollywood star power with political activism, creating a potent platform few could challenge without significant backlash. Her Vietnam War opposition, while based in legitimate concerns, reportedly became a litmus test she used to judge people's moral worth. Lancaster's assessment of Fonda was his most controversial, as many viewed her activism as courageous rather than calculating. Yet his critique wasn't of her political positions, but of methods he considered manipulative and divisive. Even when fighting for justice, Lancaster allegedly concluded, she used tactics that were fundamentally unjust. Behind Hollywood's golden facade lurked shadows darker than any film noir. Lancaster's explosive revelations force us to question everything we thought we knew about cinema's greatest legends. Were your favorite stars truly heroes or monsters hiding behind carefully crafted smiles? Which of these revelations shocked you most? Could today's celebrities be hiding similar secrets behind social media perfection? Comment below and share your thoughts on Hollywood's greatest deception, the monsters we invited into our hearts and homes.